Trigger warning. This episode discusses sensitive subjects, including sexual assault and child molestation. Please take care of yourself and listen with discernment. Thank you for listening.
You're listening to
Sticky Note Conversations with Erika Washington. Way below acceptable. Way below acceptable.
On this week's episode, I've seen conversations about renaming anything that has to do with Cesar Chavez. And so I feel like the movement as a whole is handling this very well. And yes, this is very alarming, but this isn't what the movement is.
Way below acceptable.
Dear Sticky Note listeners, it's your host and creator and executive director and whatever other title I feel like having this week, Erika Washington, and here for another episode of Sticky Note Conversations. I'd like to welcome you back and jump right into what I think is a very important and timely conversation. You may have heard, and if you haven't, you probably are avoiding news altogether, but the New York Times released an article after doing 5 years worth of reporting and researching last week that made waves across the atmosphere. It is in regards to Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta and some apparent victims of Cesar Chavez. The report spotlights Cesar Chavez as a rapist as well as a child molester. And so we want to talk about that. We want to talk about what that means for the Latino community, what it means for civil rights movements, what it means for movement towards solidarity. We want to talk about what it means for women and young girls. And all those questions will not be answered in 60 minutes or less. But I did want to talk to some folks and see just what initial reactions are, not necessarily looking for anyone to be the spokesperson for the entire community of Hispanic or Latino folks, but wanted to just talk about what those reactions were from the New York Times article and then the conversations that have been had across the social media atmosphere since then. So I would like to welcome Noé Orosco. I wanted to roll my R. I don't even know if you're supposed to roll your R in your name, but I enjoy rolling an R. Noé is a Las Vegas resident, and he is a former seasonal farm worker in the Central Valley in California, and also a good friend of the podcast. And so I asked him, and with his trepidation, he decided to come on and have this conversation, and just talk about his thoughts and feelings on it. So I welcome your thoughts and feelings on this conversation as well, as you can always reach out to us and leave your thoughts, questions, comments, and concerns. But for now, let's welcome Noé. Hello, Noé.
Hello, Erika. Thank you so much for welcoming me on your podcast.
I am happy to have you here. Last minute, I should say, but that's how breaking news goes, I guess. First and foremost, as I ask most people when they come on the podcast, is for them to introduce themselves. Like when you walk into a room, what do you want people to know about you? Who is Noé?
Yeah, thank you. I feel it has changed over the course of my time right here on Earth. Definitely, when I was in elementary and school, I was very much seen as Mexican American. And at some point in time, you kind of resist that, where you're just like, I just want to be like everybody else. And so not really knowing what that means, if that is American or anything else, you just want to almost blend in with the rest of the crowd. As I got into undergrad and I started really reflecting, right, on just all the different identities that we get, I did go through that phase, right, where it was just like, no, you need to embrace your culture. You need to embrace your heritage. And because as I was learning, this government, the United States of America in general, has very much tried to whiten its history and its people. And so from that point, I was very much like, I'm I'm resisting it because I don't want to lose who I am. And then as I continue to reflect on that, I have come with the realization that I am actually Indigenous. And so I identify as Indigenous right now. And it has been a long journey, but I think it's a journey that, a lot of people go through their life trying to reflect on that. And so I just feel fortunate enough that I've gotten to a place where I can confidently say that is what I am.
All right. Noé, the Indigenous Las Vegas resident. But that makes complete sense, when you think about, again, the geography of what was here before many of us were here and how deeply those roots go and how that needs to be celebrated and spotlighted just as much as any other Indigenous folks or anyone else who identifies as wherever their roots came from when they're, coming from Europe or different parts of Africa or South America or what have you. All of that, I think, needs to be celebrated. So I want to jump right into the conversation. You said that you did some seasonal farm work. How old were you when you were doing that, and how did that come about?
Yeah, I think maybe 12, 13 was the earliest I can recall. And that originally, how it would come about was that my parents were unable to find a caretaker for myself and my younger brother. And so we would end up going, I would like to say, I have 3 other siblings, an older brother and sister, myself, and then a younger brother. And the older siblings would go with my parents. I do remember being like 3rd, 4th grade. There were some times that myself and my younger brother would stay at home while they would go working in fields. At the times, it would be olives, oranges, and grapes that they would be harvesting. And so it would just be myself taking care of my brother, who was 3 years younger than me. I was in about 3rd or 4th grade. But going into the field and harvesting as best as I could, it would be around when I was 12, 13 years old, definitely when I was already a senior in high school. And then when I was in college, so I grew up in the Central Valley in California, and I went to school in the Bay Area for my undergrad. There was a couple of semesters where I would come back and I would help my father working in the fields at that time, harvesting oranges. So I myself had harvested some grapes, oranges, and then there was one season in my senior year in high school with one of my uncles. We ended up planting a whole orchard of orange trees.
Oh, wow. So how would you describe the work? Like, are the hours really long? And excuse my ignorance on this. Did it feel like a regular job, or did it feel, I don't know. How did it feel?
No, so it did not feel like a regular job. The vivid memories I have of planting the orchards, it was in the summer, and I remember it was about 5:30 maybe. We ended up getting up, my younger brother and I, because he was with me. And my uncle, who was my dad's younger brother, ended up picking us up. Fortunately, we didn't have to go too far because a lot of times people will travel upwards to an hour if they're going to go, depending on what they're harvesting and what they're working in. But fortunately for us, it was no more than like a 20-minute drive from where we were. And by the time the sun rose, we were drenched in sweat. And so we would have different groups. There was a group who was actually digging the hole where we were going to be planting the tree. And then there was another group that was putting all the trees where the holes were at. And then myself and my younger brother were the ones tasked with actually putting the trees in the hole and then covering them with the dirt. And then there was a protective paper or cardboard that we would use to put around the tree so that it can hold itself up. Since it is a smaller tree, they do grow upwards to 12, 13 feet. And so it wasn't anything where it's just like that 9 to 5. So that's what that was when we were planting the trees. There was times when we were pruning, I think is the term in English, when you're trimming the branches so that it makes it easier for the fruits to be able to grow and easier for people to harvest them when it comes time to harvest them. I believe that one actually it was lemon trees that we were pruning, and so I didn't harvest them, but we're just cutting the branches that are not going to bear any fruits, and so that was very hard because it was very thorny, and so as you're with the scissors chopping down the branches, sometimes you have to get a little bit in there, and so you would get poked with some of the thorns. In terms of the actual oranges when we were harvesting them, because that's what I had done more of, the same thing. I mean, we would be getting up early and then we would go to an orchard and we would start working there. And if we were to finish that, we would already have the task of now we're going to drive, another 10, 20 minutes to the next orchard so that we can continue doing that. And one thing that I do remember is there's a lot of camaraderie there with a lot of the people that are working because they work together. They've worked together for so many years. But one of the things that I would constantly hear is that they would say, we are going to work until the ball drops. And the ball was the sun, where they were saying until the sun sets, we are working. And so a lot of times the farm workers, this is the main income that they have. And so they're not going to be paying you by the hour. They're going to be paying you by how many crates you are able to fill. And so they very much want to maximize it. Whereas soon as there is enough daylight for you to be able to see, where the oranges are, you are going to be working. And sometimes people would power through the lunches that they would have or that they would want to take. They would be very strategic with how they would be doing that so that they could maximize the amount of time. And then they would be going up until either we would harvest the entire orchard or until, we would essentially hit that stopgap. But people would be ready to go from sun up until sundown because they were trying to maximize how many of those crates they would be filling so that they can maximize the amount of income that they would have. And then in the winter, when December is when there was some time when we would be starting the harvest, and sometimes because of the weather, it would rain the previous day. It would be too muddy to actually go in to the field. They would have to essentially just call it off, right, where they're not going to work a couple of days. So every day and every hour that they are working, people would be trying to maximize the amount of time that they are harvesting the crops.
Were you one of the youngest, or were there other folks there?
Oh, no. So as I had mentioned, it was about 12 the earliest that I can recall. But even then, you would see whole families there. And I think it does go back to the childcare situation where you don't have anybody to leave the children with. And so what you are naturally going to do is take them with you. And then a lot of times, the ones, as soon as they are of that age, and it could be, 5, 6, honestly, when they are already contributing to it, there are going to be some oranges maybe that fall from the tree, from the trees, or maybe even if they just walk up to the tree, there are going to be a couple of oranges that they will be able to pick and pluck from the tree itself. And so these are all working hands, and some families definitely saw it with as many hands as we can have. It's going to speed up the process for us filling up those crates. And those crates were about 3 feet tall, about 3 by 3, I think. And so they would definitely utilize all of the hands. And if it meant, taking some of the kids, that's what they would do. But I do feel there were others that it was just because of the childcare. I know there was some relatives that I had that would take their kids, and it wasn't to the level of I need you to be working and contributing and doing that. Sometimes you would just hear a lot of laughter, and it was the kids because they were playing. But very much with the mindset of this isn't a playground. So don't break a tree, don't step on the oranges if they are ripe, and the ones that basically we need to put into the crates, because sometimes some of the oranges would be rotten. They would not be, mature, or God, what's the word that I'm thinking? Maduras is the word that comes to my mind, but they're not essentially ripe. And so you would hear laughter, you would hear a lot of joy there, but it's us hardworking people. And it would go from, I mean, I would say as young as 5 to, up into the 70s, maybe.
You're listening to
Sticky Note Conversations with Erika Washington.
I know that you are not old enough to have been around during the farm worker movement and Cesar Chavez, and that was the 60s and 70s. I'm wondering how different farm work life was between then and now, or then the time that you were doing it, and if that same sort of space where it was still people of all ages having to do this as their main form of income, but in thinking about how they were treated and wondering if the movement helped you be able to do this job and do it in safer conditions. Were there older folks there that maybe talked about at all what it was like to be doing this work for so many seasons and to do it as basically like a career?
Yeah, absolutely. So my father did it for almost 20 years, I think it was. And he tells me that when he had started, there were those, I call them mud hopper planes, little tiny ones, rinky-dink ones, where they would be flying over the orchards so that they can spray pesticides on them. But they would be doing that while people were working and harvesting the fields. And so because of the labor movement and because of the hard work of a lot of people, right, not just some individuals, they were able to get some of those protections where it was like the farm owners are prohibited from spraying fields when people are on there. The short handle hoe is another one. I don't think my father was the one who he didn't use it when he had started, but the short handle hoe was another tool that had been used in the 20s up until maybe the 50s or so. And it was used because the farm owners would say, we want to minimize the amount of harm or damage to the crops, that you need to use the short handle hoe, because at that point you are hunched over and you are trying to take out the weeds and clear the area for the crop to be able to flourish. And so that was something that was a standard practice. And because of the movement, they were able to ban the use of the short handle hoe. Wage was another thing that I feel the labor movement was able to ensure that people were getting paid a decent wage. I don't think that it's anywhere where it should be, but it's at a better place than it was had the movement not been around. And so I very much feel that the labor movement, and especially for farm workers, it definitely benefited tremendously. And I don't know a whole lot about like in the Salinas Valley. So this is not going just about 2 hours south of the Bay Area. It's known a lot for strawberries and like lettuce and all that. And I remember having a professor at San Jose State who came from that region, and he would tell some stories about just the farm workers constantly being bent over as they were harvesting a lot of these crops, and they would get home and they would have a lot of pain and a lot of other pains. But without the labor movement, I feel that the conditions would have been a lot worse.
And so because your father also did this work, was Cesar Chavez talked about in your family? Was he revered in the same ways as I guess I could think about Martin Luther King in Black households, his picture being up on the wall next to white Jesus?
No, actually, not to that level, right? Of where he was constantly talked about or even revered to that level. And I think one of the reasons is because There's a lot of intricacies to the whole labor movement, the farm worker movement specifically, because my father, for a good while, was undocumented. It was during the amnesty that had happened. They always say it's because of Reagan that I became a citizen, is what a lot of people that fall under my father's category say. But it wasn't Reagan, right, who had done it. He's just the president that signed it. There was I think it was a Democratic control, if not on the entire both chambers, but it was that bipartisan support. So it wasn't just Reagan, and I definitely, I'm on my soapbox right now on that. But like my father qualified for citizenship because of that amnesty. And so that means he was undocumented for a good part of those almost 20 years. And there was some tension there between the farm worker movement, the United Farm Worker movement, and a lot of undocumented farm workers. And so it's not to say that my father was over here bashing him. It was just something that didn't get discussed a whole lot. I know he was aware of who Cesar Chavez was, Dolores Huerta, and the farm worker movement, but it wasn't something that, we were actively going to marches. We were actively participating in UFW events because Delano, where the headquarters was maybe an hour south of where I grew up. So it was very, very close, right, in proximity, but it wasn't something where we were over here constantly trying to go and be in these spaces. And it's because there was that history and there's a lot of documentation of where Cesar Chavez had mentioned and actively was reporting some undocumented farm workers to immigration enforcement or calling immigration enforcement on them. And I don't think it was, I can't say it definitively, but I don't think it was because he was like, I don't like them. A lot of the right-leaning extremist people in the country now, they just don't like you. And I don't think that was the case with it. I think it was more of like that strategic move, because if you are striking, which the United Farm Workers did a lot, if you are on the lines picketing and now the farm owner is like, all right, well, I don't want to pay you $5, to fill up this crate, but I'm going to then go get some undocumented people that are going to do it for $3. Like, it would undermine the movement. And so, I know that's where those challenges do come in, but I don't think it was because he hated undocumented people. It was just going to undermine that movement. And so that's why I feel that in my specific case, it was, he wasn't mentioned constantly and he wasn't seen over here as like the hero, end all be all. And I don't even know, truthfully, if my father knows how much the United Farm Worker movement was able to improve those conditions for the farm workers. I know he's aware that the conditions were better, but I don't know if he would be able to pinpoint it right to the farm worker movement.
I mean, that sounds like the basic recipe of divide and conquer, right? So if you pit folks against each other, even folks who look like each other, but you have different status, then it can say, oh, well, we need to move those folks out of the way. It sounds very similar to women gaining the right to vote and white women throwing Black women off to the side, or because we can't get it if you stay involved. So y'all have to wait. And so, it's a tactic, and it's a tactic that's constantly used. So saying all that, when the New York Times came out with this article last week regarding Cesar Chavez and many of the accusations against him, what were your initial thoughts?
My initial thoughts were I was unaware of those accusations. And maybe I had heard it, but I can't tell you, right? That knee-jerk reaction is like, I don't remember ever really hearing anything about that. What I do remember hearing was the tension between undocumented people and the strikes and how it was undermining it. The other thing that I also would remember hearing was that he was very anti-communist. And so if people in the farm worker in the UFW were seen or were said that they were communist, he would essentially be like, well, we're gonna remove you from the entire movement, because he was very anti-communist, and I think he also didn't want it again to undermine the movement. And I'm not saying that this is something that we should praise him for doing it, because people were just they were like, hey, they've said that you are communist, so now you need to entirely remove yourself from there. He might have used it to remove people that were in leadership so that he can consolidate some power there. That is very much something that I wouldn't put it past, because if we're looking as you said, that divide and conquer is just like you are going to use different tools that are at your disposal to try to consolidate some of that power to move whatever needle you're trying to move. And so those are the stuff that I had been aware of. That again, that knee-jerk reaction was, I don't recall hearing that, and it could just be that because in my household there wasn't those constant conversations, about oh, well, Cesar Chavez did X, Y, and Z, and he was a big part of the movement. But that's the stuff that I know I can speak to, because it was more of the other stuff that I had heard. But it was very like a gut punch, right? Because I think, as you had said it in your intro, it was like he is seen as the face of the movement, but he wasn't the movement, right? You had Dolores Huerta, who was, unfortunately, also a victim of sexual assault and rape, and she was the other face of that movement. And then another face that you don't hear too much about, our Filipino farm worker Larry Itlong, he was also a big part of the movement, if I'm not mistaken. I think he was actually within the Filipino community. They were one of the first ones to start some of the strikes. And then from there, they were able to provide that collaboration between the Latino community and the Filipino community. And then they were able to really move the needle. But it was very much that gut punch of, damn, this individual's actions are definitely going to derail what the movement did. And I think in a lot of times we have seen Black and Brown communities, Indigenous communities, one individual is seen as that spokesperson, that individual for the entire community. And whatever moral compass they have, it is basically thrown on the entire community. And I was very much fearful that that's what was going to happen right in this moment, where they were going to be like, here's the accusations. You talked about the New York Times article. It was very detailed, about a good 30-minute read, I think. And my fear was very much that they were going to essentially put all of what he had done and thrown it into the movement to maybe even try to derail some of the accomplishments and the things that the movement was able to do.
Do you think that this will derail the movement?
No, I don't. Actually, and I mean that initial thought when everything came to light the way that it did, my initial thought was it can. But I think, as I have seen, mostly in California and here in Nevada, I think the Southwest really, possibly, organizations and people within the progressive movements, within the labor movements, they are doing a very good job of pretty much saying, look, these accusations, we do not take them lightly. We should be believing victims when they come out and say, that they have been victims. And so we do need to assess the individual. But in terms of the movement and the things that we have accomplished, during his time and that we are accomplishing now, or any future struggles that we may accomplish, it is not going to be dictated by this individual and their pasts. And so I feel that there are some conversations that are happening. I'm not in those, but I've seen things being renamed. I've seen conversations about renaming anything that has to do with Cesar Chavez. And so I feel like the movement as a whole is handling this very well. And yes, this is very alarming, but this isn't what the movement is.
I think that's a really good point. And I think they make that in the New York Times article where they say, and I believe it's one of the victims, and I hate to give her that title, right? But one of the ones that was preyed upon by him is that, he was not the movement. The movement is, and he was not the hero. The hero is the movement. And so thinking about it from that angle, I think should, in my opinion, help people understand and digest that you have to separate a human being from the greater good. And because that's basically what Dolores Huerta tried to do by not saying anything, is because she was trying to sacrifice herself, or from what I'm reading, it feels like she was sacrificing herself for the greater good and for the movement. She was sacrificing herself for her children. And I remember meeting Dolores Huerta a number of years ago, and one of the things that she said that she carried with her was not being able to be there enough for her children, and that her children really pushed back on this whole idea of, her being this icon of farm workers' rights and civil rights movement, because they wanted her at home. They wanted her at home baking brownies or whatever, and she wasn't. And she felt, even at this time, so she's in her late 90s now, she had to be still either in her 90s or late 80s when I met her, and that they still hold this, right? And so, as a mother, as a woman, as a person, you can't have it all. Or you can have it all, you just can't have it all at the same time. And so the amount of sacrifice that she put out there for herself, or for her community, for her family, was not just personal. And I'm wondering how it has affected her in the long term. But I really do think about the fact that at that time, I had no idea how much she had sacrificed in order, because if she had said something, if she had made it known what he was doing, and then others came forward and said, because she said she did not know about the young girls. So if Dolores would have given them what they needed to come forward and say something too, because they did say things to people. They did not keep it a secret. And that's the other point in this article, is that they did not just now tell anyone. They had said stuff in the 80s and in the 70s, and folks told them to be quiet. So, but if Dolores had, would that have derailed a movement, and would that make things worse? Now, I don't know. Like, there's so shoulda, coulda, wouldas, but there's no right answer. I don't know.
Yeah, and I think that you actually bring up a really good point, going back to like with the movement and how they were able to kind of address it or handle it. And I think that what you had just said is a key part of it, where it was Dolores, she unilaterally decided, right? Like, I'm not going to, because I do not want to derail the movement. A couple of others had also mentioned, right, other things, not just the allegations, or not the allegations, not just the what ended up happening with these. I think it was two girls at the time, right? And in the article that you're talking about, they did come out. And a lot of it was like, well, you don't want to derail the movement. But I think at least one of them, and I'm drawing a blank on her name, it was at that point he already had some sort of like fame, right? Like he had already, or communities had already renamed streets, parks, and things under his name. And so the movement very much was like, it pains them to know, right, that Dolores and others did not come forward because they were afraid that it was going to derail the movement. And nobody should, have to like balance that, or to decide, right, am I going to come forward and speak out, right, that I have been a victim, or am I going to maintain silent because I do not want to harm the work that we are trying to accomplish. And I feel that the labor movement as a whole is is consistent in that, where they're saying like, yes, this is horrible. It's atrocious what ended up happening. And equally, it sucks that, some individuals didn't come forward to say it, and others that maybe did come forward were silenced. But I think it also goes into some of the gender dynamics, right? Not just within the United States, but then if you look also just in the Latin American culture or aspects of it, where you have that machismo, where you have the dynamics, the gender roles. And so women, Dolores being one of them, right? Where it was like almost like that challenge of like she's speaking up. And I think the article talks about it, where there was at least one recorded heated debate where it was between her and Cesar Chavez, but there was always that gender dynamic of like, women, you are going to be the lesser of in this moment in time, and that in itself also, right, is just, it ain't right. I don't think that. I've always had an issue with that. And so I don't think that the farm worker movement and everything that's around this situation, like, it was not immune to that.
Yeah, in that recording, he called her out her name. And it's one of those things, it's like, is the self-sacrifice worth it? Or could we still get to where we need to get to and call out bad actors? Because as many folks are also saying, oh, this is a distraction from the Epstein files, which it should not be a distraction from the Epstein files. It should add to it. And it should also show how quickly people are moving. And although there are some folks who come within the same old commentary of why did she just now say something, or I don't believe it, or all of that. And people have the right to their opinions. But
they do, but they don't have their right to, they don't have, they have the right to their opinion, but not to the facts. So like the facts are there, right? So like just because you don't agree with the facts doesn't mean that it didn't happen or it invalidates it.
Exactly. And demanding a woman say something whenever she says something, like you putting that onus back on the person that it happened to. Because then why didn't he say something before he died? You know what? Actually, I was kind of a jerk. And let me tell you some of the things I did. But to that point with the Epstein files, like, there's so much of just hiding and people not saying anything, and not enough things changing, and not enough people losing their jobs, not enough things coming down. Whereas I see on this side, like you said, they're changing the names of some holidays to Farm Workers Days. California, it's a state holiday. Cesar Chavez Day is a state holiday. And I know that our fiscal sponsor, who was based in California, who always had that day off, has already immediately changed it to Dolores Huerta Day. It's Dolores. It's on our calendar already. That's what that is. And so, we're off next Tuesday. So no one bother me next Tuesday. Because it's Dolores Huerta Day, which I could also say, I don't understand why there aren't more Dolores Huerta streets and holidays and people fighting for that as much as they were for Cesar Chavez, because there's a Cesar Chavez street in, I think, almost every city that I've ever visited.
And I think that maybe
schools.
Yeah, and I think that maybe does go right to just those gender dynamic and the roles. Like you were talking about women getting the right to vote, right? That only happened in the last century. And so the mere fact that it was just like, oh, this person, Cesar Chavez, in this example, was the face of the entire movement. It was like, all praise be to him. And I've had conversations with others where they were just like, even like with Rosa Parks, right? Like she is the face of what had started that, but she wasn't it wasn't like spontaneous, right? Like, yeah, maybe she might have been tired and been like, I ain't moving, but like she had been trained and there was a whole network that was working right towards that movement. It's just at that point in time, like it is her who is named, right? And so I think it's very similar in that sense, in this side within the farm worker community, that a lot of times it was just seen, right, as Cesar Chavez. But I think that also points to the dangers of having one figure, one individual being the face of an entire movement, because I think rightfully so, the community was like, no, especially women, right, would say like Dolores was right there. Like they were co-equals in this movement. And so you can't just be saying like, oh, Cesar Chavez did X, Y, and Z. Si se puede. That's her. She's the one who pretty much came up with that saying. And so she contributed so much to the movement. But I think because of the gender aspects of it, whether it's conscious or subconscious, because within that the machismo and the culture, like there is a lot of like, no, you have these designated roles because you're a woman, and you have these designated roles because you are a man. But even when we blend it with the American culture, like there's still a lot of that happening here. How many accounts of in those Epstein files and others, right, of where you have heard people have told you stories of people that have been assaulted, have been victims of atrocious crimes, and nothing happens. I mean, we got a sitting president right now that it's still got a whole lot of a cult movement that they're just like, he can do no harm.
It always makes me think if women will ever be safe. To your point, though, I think about not needing another hero, right? How do we move from idolizing singular people in these different movements that are always building? Because there's always something that we're needing to fight for, because the patriarchy, because capitalism, because white supremacy, because of so many different things that we're continuing to have to fight and build for the world that we want to live in. And usually someone rises to the top and they become this spokesperson. You got the dude who thinks he's a spokesperson for Black people in Target, but he's not. But you've got other folks who are charismatic, who, are in the right room at the right time, and they're media trained, and they've got the voice, and they've got the gumption and the wherewithal to keep going and all of that, and they can ignite something in somebody that helps you decide that, yes, I actually want to be on this right side of history and I want to fight for human rights, whatever that looks like. Those people will come up. But how do we keep from idolizing them and making them the movement and not the work and the blood, sweat, and tears and the power that lies behind it?
Yeah, I think part of it, and like you had said right in the intro, we're not going to get to solve all of the world's problems in 60 minutes. But I think,
I lied. I really wanted to do that. So
okay. All right. Well, you know what? Let me just cancel the rest of my morning. So I think one of the ways is collectively we need to move past that, right? Like whenever there is an aspiring person that does come up and has everything that you just mentioned, it's like, don't get so caught up or focused on the individual. Like, what is the message? And I think that, that goes across a lot of platforms where it's like, I don't care who the messenger is, did you get the message? And so if the message is, right, that we're moving towards this collective agreement, that we're moving towards equality, egalitarianism, whatever it is, like, let's not focus on who is the one that's saying it. Is it Erika Washington saying it? All right, all praise be to Erika Washington. Like, no, like, what is it that we are trying to accomplish? And then from there, we start moving together. And I think the other component there is that whenever you hear some of those dissenting voices, it's not silencing them, because that's what ended up happening, right, in this situation. Whenever there was anybody who was labeled as a communist, immediately they were silenced or removed. If ever there was any of these issues in terms of like saying that girls, were being raped and being inappropriately touched, probed, groomed, they would be silent, removed. And I think in that article, it actually says that one of them, when she kind of became a little bit more conscious of that, like he immediately was just like, I don't want to interact with you anymore. And so like when you have dissenting voices that are saying like, actually, I got a question, or like, maybe we should reassess what we got going on, it's not silencing them. I think within that movement, there needs to be that infrastructure set up to be like, you know what, they have come up with, depending on what it is, I think it's going to have the levels to it, right? If someone comes forward and says like, yo, like I was raped, I was, put in this situation where I didn't feel safe, you need to listen to them and you need to take it very serious. If it's just like a disagreement in terms of like, you know what, actually we should shut down the entire strip here in Vegas, and other people are saying, well, actually, I don't know, because it might hurt the economy. Like that, those conversations are something that you definitely need to put time and effort and energy into to figuring out, all right, is this going to achieve that end goal that we have? But when you have people that are saying that they do not feel safe, and that that there's people within the movement that are harming them or potentially threatening them, like those concerns need to be addressed a lot differently than whenever you got some other maybe more cosmetic in terms of shifts and priorities of like what we're trying to accomplish. And I think that right now, one is outweighing the other, right? Where they're saying like, because we need to, strike and make sure that nobody purchases grapes, right? Like what ended up happening in 1973 with the grape strike. It was like, that is the end goal. And everything else that is trying to distract it or harm it, like that is going to be quashed, because the end goal is we need to ensure that there are these agreements between the farm workers and the farm owners.
Yeah, more checks and balances inside of these movements and organizations. And I think sometimes the hard part with that is like some are not actual organizations, right? If it's an organic sort of uprising and things just start to happen and snowball in certain ways. And not to say that things aren't still planned, because to your point about Rosa Parks and being tired and all of that, like I really do feel like we were, as children, done a disservice by this like really vanilla narrative of what the civil rights movement was, and that she was just tired and she didn't feel like getting up. She worked so hard, and the white man said she had to get up, when it was they were trained, and I was fortunate enough to attend a training, like it was 12-day training of civil resistance and nonviolent training with Dr. James Lawson in Nashville. This was 2014, I think. And there were many people who were a part of SNCC and different organizations that were there, including him. He was a part of the sanitation movement in Memphis. And he was the reason why Dr. King came to Memphis when he was assassinated, and to work on that movement. But they showed us some videos that I had never seen before of folks training to do some of the lunch counter sit-ins. And they had to do it to each other. So they threw food, they spit, they did all this kind of stuff on each other to help them build up the thick skin that they would need in order to put up with that. And so they were yelling at each other, calling them names and doing all that, and like really giving it to them and letting them know what this was going to be like before they went in. And similar things happened with the sit-ins or with the bus boycott, that there was training involved, and folks really put a lot of effort into that. And I think people sometimes may not know that or gloss over the fact that we put in a lot of work in order to get where we were trying to get to. And I think the same for the farm workers movement. And like you said, Filipino folks were already working on this, and so them coming together was strategic. And from what I understand, what's his name? The leader of the Filipino movement. His name was
Larry Itlong.
That he was more brazen. And so he chose to stay in the back because he couldn't placate to white folks in the same way that he felt like Cesar Chavez could. And maybe it was that big old cigar he always had in his mouth. I've never seen a picture of him. He didn't have a giant cigar in his mouth at all. And I was just like, sir, did you ever take it out? But so they were strategic on that. Like, who's going to do what? Because it needs to be the right person stepping forward. So things are done strategically in that way. And so I think also to that point, when it comes to those checks and balances, it's harder because we put him here and now he's already here. We don't have anybody else to put in this spot that will keep the momentum going. So we allow, and I say we just because I've been a part of a number of movements, and we all have to take our fault in allowing the tomfoolery around us for the greater good, whether I'm at the legislature or it's Congress or what have you, when you're so focused on getting a bill passed or you're trying to get something done, sometimes we see stuff that not to the level of, young children being molested or anything of that nature, but just little random little things, right? And that you sort of let things slide. And thinking back on it, it's like, oh, well, maybe I need to pay more attention to X, Y, and Z. And I think we all can say that we can do that more, and call people out and call people in gentle ways to help course correct before things go too far.
Yeah, and I think the other part there is, if you're looking at it within the civil rights movement, like, he was just one of many, right? Like, if we're just focusing within that narrow scope of Latino, Hispanic individuals, you have right next to him Dolores Huerta, right? Who doesn't get enough praise of the work that she done. And I think that, just me in saying that she doesn't get enough praise, it's not saying we got to idolize her, right? Like, we do need to praise her and give credit where credit is due. And so she was very instrumental in that. And so any movement, any individual that arises in the future, right, and is charismatic to everything that you had alluded to earlier, like, give credit to them, because that's something that not everybody can do, to what you said, right? Between just Larry and Cesar Chavez, where, I don't think I could be that face of a movement. We're constantly in the cameras and all of that. But you had Rodolfo Corky Gonzalez, who was a Chicano civil rights activist from Colorado. He did a lot of work with the youth. You had Reyes Tejerina, I think it was. He was pushing for land rights of New Mexicans, of Mexican Americans in New Mexico, because I think you had mentioned it, right? Like, the Southwest was all once part of Mexico. So there was a lot of people that were pushing, and we were all trying to move collectively for, we need to have the same civil rights as white Americans. And so it wasn't just like in a silo of the fact that it was Cesar Chavez and the farm worker movements, and there was nothing else going on. And that's just one sliver of it, right? Because then you got a lot of the Black leaders that are overlapping with it. There's a song by the famous Tigers of the North, Los Tigres del Norte, where they're talking about Cesar Chavez and some of the stuff that he had done. And then at the end, they're saying like, oh, there's some similarities, there's some parallels essentially to MLK. And it's because, like, if I'm not mistaken, they had met. And so there was a lot of overlap, right, with a lot of these leaders. And so it's not to say that it was just one individual that was essentially like carrying on his shoulders everything that was going on. He was just one individual in a sea of a bunch of leaders that were pushing for rights at that time.
Yeah. And I think the key word is he's an individual and a human being. And we cannot canonize and put folks on these super high pedestals. And also to say that there's complicated and tomfoolery that has happened in every movement.
Yeah, and I think maybe, as you were saying it right now, I think also when we look at the oppressed communities in America, like, you have to basically, have that, like, always be mindful of your surroundings, be on your step with your best foot forward, because the minute that you step out or that they see you acting a fool, like, you get thrown everything at you. Whereas if you are a white American or European American, it's just like, well, like, they kind of get that pass. And so, like, we are told from a very young age, right, to, like, just, dot your T's and cross dot your I's and cross your T's, because the government is always watching you. And so that does also add that other level of stress of, like, we maybe going to what you're saying in terms of canonizing people, or it's just like, well, like, we can't derail it. We can't, like, highlight and focus on the negative because someone else is going to focus on the negative. And I don't think, that we need to be putting it in that binary way of, like, because they're always going to come with the negative, we got to come with the positive, or maybe minimize the negative. Like, no, like, we need to have these serious conversations if there's these serious allegations and truths and facts that surface from individuals.
Yeah, because when it comes down to it, then it just says that we're scared of white people and what they think about us. as communities and not seeing us as humans. And if we've always been fighting for human rights, and to be human, that means to be human is not to be faultless, and that we as communities have to hold our people accountable. And it is our job to hold our people accountable. I think that's perfect, actually. Before you go, because I always ask everybody this question about democracy. What is democracy? And do you think we currently have it?
I think democracy is coming right from the Greek words of like the rule of the people. And if we're looking at it through that lens, no, we do not have it, because there is a small group of people that are in control. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we cannot get to it. I think if that's through the lens that I am looking at it, right? And so in America, we Black and brown and oppressed people are going to be having to fight for the democracy and for the vision that we have of a democracy where people are truly seen, right, as equal and are equally contributing to improving the society, just because of the origins of this country. And so that's where I feel like we are not there, and we will continue to fight for that, because just the origins of this country is inherently going to be against communities of color. And so we are going to continue to be oppressed. And then I don't mean for it to be all doom and gloom, but one of the ways that we can move towards that democracy that we all want is sometimes even just celebrating some of those small victories in terms of even cultural celebrations. Like you said, you're off next week for Dolores Huerta Day. There's going to be a whole lot of cultural events that are happening. And so we need to celebrate those diversities because they constantly talk about, at some point, it was always talked about America is the melting pot of the world. And for a while, I actually believed it, but I think we need to reassess how we say it, because when you say America is a melting pot or America is the land of immigrants, we have always been of immigrants, you are negating or denying the original people of this land, the indigenous people. And so when we talk about it, we need to talk about the entire story. And so it is on us to be able to be sharing our stories to continue making the fabric of what is America.
Thank you so much, Noé.
Absolutely. Thank you for inviting me.
It's been a pleasure talking to you, and I appreciate you telling me a little bit about your family and your childhood and your experience working on the farms and harvesting oranges. I say a personal thank you because I eat a lot of oranges, and I am grateful that you have planted some of those trees that I'm sure I have nourished my body from. So thank you. And hopefully you can return and we can chat about other things. We'll find something fun to talk about next time.
Yeah, absolutely. I would love to talk about more fun stuff.
Okay. Well, y'all, this has been another episode of Sticky Note Conversations with Erika Washington.
Thanks for listening to Sticky Note Conversations with Erika Washington. Hosted and executively produced by Erika Washington. With editing by Black Gypsy LLC. Special thanks to KUNV 91.5 in Las Vegas. This show is powered by Make It Work Nevada, a project of Tides Advocacy.